Hi, I'm Brian Russell. Welcome back to class. I want to analyze the verbs that we have and a couple of other features. 146. So I invite you to pull out your work and let's talk about how the parsing works and do some grammatical analysis here. As we look at the text, I want you to notice that we almost have a case study in parsing here in the first verse and the beginning of the second, because we get three different forms of the verb to praise. Hey, lamed, lamed. Starts off hallelujah, and then we have halali, and then we have ahalela. And this gives you three different looks at the same verb in a couple of different parsings. So if we go to verse 1, the text opens up with hallelujah. Again, the Yah is the Lord. And we have a imperative second masculine plural. So this is a general call out, and it's pe'el. And maybe that's the hardest part. But notice the form here. The parsing, we have that suffix. So again, this could have perhaps been just a straight up perfect, but the context indicates this is a command. So this is the imperative. And we know it's a pe'el. We would have anticipated having a doubled second radical. But typically when, in this case, we don't get the doubling. And notice it's marked with this. The little mark, that's saying that something unusual is happening, because there's not really a great reason that there isn't a dagesh in that second radical. It's just not there. So, but we do have hallelujah. So the Masoretes noted that. It happens again in the second verse as well, or in the second verb. Haleli, and this just comes down to pronunciations, because in a sense you might actually think this is Hali. And I have to apologize. I recorded the whole video and then the video disappeared. So obviously it's clipped in and the whole board looks different, but I want to pick it back up. I was about to talk about this third variation on halal. This is a cohortative this time. The lengthened imperfect. It's also known, so notice you can see the first common singular, and then the cohortative adds to what looks like a imperfect, adds a kamatz hey, and the imperfect is essentially the cohortative is essentially your command in the first person. So this would be, if you look up in Arnold Choi, this is a cohortative of resolve. I resolve, I will praise. Again, pe'el is going to be a denominative. Then we move to the I will sing, or I intend to sing. Another cohortative, zamar. This is a call, or this is a pe'el also. You can see it clearly. Has the doubled second radical like we'd expect. Again, cohortative. It has the kamatz hey at the end. This is another denominative use of the pe'el. Both halal and zamar build off of noun as verbs, so there's not a real significance in the fact that it's pe'el. So these are denominatives, and again, this is a cohortative of resolve. When we move into verse 3, when you run into this negative particle all, that's going to signal that you're going to have a non-perfect or imperfect. So this is a signal that we have a jussive. If you look up in Arnold Choi, I think it's 3.3, if I remember right, for your jussives. 3.3.1, this is your jussive of prohibition, because it's a negative command. And as far as your parsing, then we have second masculine plural, and this is a call. You don't trust. Wanted to include this phrase, she'ain. This isn't a verb per se, but I did want to point out that the sheen, you see this several different places in this particular psalm. This is a definite article. This is the relative pronoun. We're used to seeing asher, right? We see that typically in prose. We see it hundreds of times, but the sheen is also a relative pronoun. You'll find it often in poetry. It's a one syllable relative pronoun, so it gives the poet some flexibility, especially for those who want to argue that poetry has a certain number of beats, and so if you need one beat, the sheen functions a lot better than the asher. And in fact, one of the characteristics of Hebrew poetry is you don't see relative pronouns very often. Now, what's the second thing? This is ein. This is the particle of non-existence. So this is a way, ein is a way of making a negative statement. There is not. And so in this case, there is no salvation. Verse 4, tetze. Okay, the tav is your third feminine singular imperfect, and this is from an original first vav that ends up being, in forms, it has a first yod. So we're used to seeing yatse, which is to go out or depart. And then yashuv, another imperfect. So these are both call imperfects. So this would be kind of future for the imperfect. Call is fiantive. Shuv, again, you might have thought this was yashav, dwell. The signal is this vowel. What's the function of this vowel in this pattern? This is a sharuk written defectively. So this is from a sheen vav bait. So this is a third masculine singular imperfect. So again, call, it's a fiantive, and this would just be a future. Avedu, perishes. So this is a perfect, and this is probably a customary perfect, saying what happens, what continues to happen. Then we get in verse 5, ashrei. Again, this isn't a verb, but this is that particle that just means happy is the one. And notice looks like a construct that is telling you, that signals that it's going with the words that come after it. So it's going to be happy is the one of whose God is the God of Jacob, whose help is the God of Jacob. Happy is the one in whose help is the God of Jacob, is how this little piece gets translated. And there we have, again, the sheen. I marked it off, another relative, and there you have God, and then Jacob's going to be in construct with El. So that would be, and by the way, what kind of genitive is that? That's a genitive of relationship, the God of Jacob, Jacob's God. Okay, then once we get to this point in the text, we get a whole array of participles. And so let's take a look at these. And what I was trying to do in all these cases is, with the exception of this participle, which I'll talk about in a minute, matir, all of these are examples of call active participles. Now you can understand their function. Look up the participle section. It's 3.4.3, I believe. Yeah, you want to read about the participle, and these are all going to be and a participle is a verbal adjective. So it's going to say something about who the God of Jacob, who Yahweh, his God, is, right? And so you can understand these essentially as either substantives, so the one who is doing this, or you can just see these as predicate adjectives depending on how you're going to translate it. So it can just be Yahweh is the one making the heavens and the earth, the one keeping, the one giving, and so on and so forth here. So you can understand these as a substantive or as a predicate, depending on, or even attributive in some cases, if depending on how you're going to translate it. So just recognize these are all participles, and the emphasis is on the action. So this is ongoing action. That's one of the things that comes out in the use of the participle, which makes this so powerful. It's giving a description of how God is, not how God was or how God will be, how God is. Really good news. Wonderful verbs here. Now I do want to point out the one oddball, which is the hifil, and this does have some causation embedded into it here. So this would be a causative use of the hifil. But the way you know it's a hifil is if you look at the mem, and you ask yourself, stop for a second, think about your paradigm, what participles have a mem on them, right? Think about that for a second. And then how do you tell the difference? If it's going to be a PL, you're going to have a segol under it. Now for the hifil, you're going to have an A-class vowel under the mem, and then notice a hirik yod, and that's exactly what you have. The only outlier here is we have the dagesh, which is why is it here? Well, it indicates that there's been a noon assimilation, and the root is actually noon, tav, resh. Okay. All right, so take a look. This is a great lesson in learning to identify participles. If you have any questions, you can ask me about them. We'll talk about them some more. Now, we get one final participle at the beginning of verse 9, and then we get two interesting verbs. The first verb, this is unusual, and I think I missed this when I was doing the translation. I haven't gone back and listened. I think I skipped the word, and I apologize for that. It's easy to see that we have an imperfect form because we have a shava. Or not a yeah, we have a yod. That's third masculine singular, and then we have a root. This is the way that you make a PL out of a root that has the second and third radical the same. And so this is actually what's known as a polel. But you use the exact same categories out of PL to talk through the polel, or to describe it. So this is going to be kind of like there's a causative factative force here in both of these cases. And here's a straight up PL. Notice, again, shava under the performative, right? And then PL, typical pattern, we have ayin, doubled second radical, this vowel pattern. This is all the same. So these would be two factatives. The imperfects here can be maybe customary, describing what typically happens. And then the Psalm 146 ends with a yemalok, easiest verb in the whole thing. This is a strong verb, third masculine singular, imperfect, future, Yahweh will reign forever. Now, I also skipped over a series of participles. These are for these marginalized groups that end up being mentioned. So we have the ones being oppressed, the ones being bound, the ones being humbled. And these are all substantive. These are clearly substantive uses of the call passive participle, right? And the key to identifying a call passive is find the root, and then there's a shuruk between the second and third radical of the root, and you see that in each case. So Psalm 146 is a textbook on participles. Go back and look at those. Review the sheet that we've been working on and learning patterns, but notice again the call active participle, holum after the first radical of the root, call passive participle, shuruk between the second and third radicals of the root. Again, I'm Brian Russell. If you have any questions, send them in to me. And what we're going to do is we build on using Arnold Choi for verbs, nouns, prepositional phrases. The next piece we're going to do is some clause analysis. I'll talk about that in our next Ask Me Anything. I'll see you next time. It's my privilege to be your professor.